Hello and welcome to VMTV Vaults with myself, Kyle Diamond. My guest for this episode is Mr. Matt Bonner, the Cage Warriors middleweight champion. If you're not familiar with Matt Bonner, over the last 16 months he has had an incredible career turnaround in Cage Warriors, fighting throughout the pandemic. He went 6-1 with his record, with a loss to Jamie Richardson, and through the pandemic has won 4 consecutive fights, including beating Nathias Fredericks for the middleweight title, and now he will make his first defence of it this Friday night at Cage Warriors Double Trouble. Need I say any more? We spoke all about that, what he attributes that career turnaround to, just his career to this point, and specifically the last 16 months, which it's been one of the best stories of Cage Warriors in the last couple of years, which, considering those trilogy events, that's a big statement, because there have been some incredible narratives that have come out on those events over the last 16 months. Without further ado, Mr. Matt Bonner. The Cage Warriors trilogy events have had some incredible stories. Every event always comes packed with a load of narratives, and I think the one, to me, it certainly crept up on me, was your story through this period. For several reasons. I think because of the way it started, and then you had the title fight with Nathias, who I believe it was his second title defense, right? So there was a lot of narratives around him. It kind of crept up on a lot of people, to the point where when I first saw it, the way your record had turned around over the last 16 months, is it, somewhere around that?
Yeah.
I was like, that is that a real stat? And I checked it out and I was like, that's incredible. Let's go back to when that started to turn around. Your last loss, was it Jamie Richardson, the last loss?
That's correct. Yeah.
And that made your record 6-1, which, to be fair, I think all but 2 of your pro fights been in Cage Warriors, something like that?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was never a worry that I thought Cage Warriors were gonna not sign you for future fights. They tend to, clearly you've proven yourself in the division that you can compete with these guys, but it must have been an incredibly strange period for you in terms of, where do I go from here? Because it was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back constantly.
Yeah, it was. I mean, like you say, I don't think there was ever going to kind of rip up a contract or anything like that, but it was a real kind of threat of me falling into this journeyman role, kind of being the gatekeeper, this, the new up and coming talent kind of working through me and getting a few rounds and having a tough fight, but then moving on to bigger and better things. So that was always something I was really quite determined not to be, is this journeyman. I still believe that I could kind of be, a threat in the division, a Cage Warriors champion. And like you've mentioned, I ended to, I managed to pull that off eventually.
I think as well, like, obviously from then you go on, was it 4 wins to get the title shot, or was the title shot the 4th?
Yeah. So the title shot was the 4th. Yeah.
So I think personally, I look at it and I think, obviously incredible for you personally, but also it's a real testament to Cage Warriors in the way that the matchmaking is done. I think in terms of when it was the right moment, it all clicked for you, and then you go from, like you said, being 6-1 to the Cage Warriors middleweight champion. Like, was there, even though you said you still always felt like you could compete and you didn't want to be considered a journeyman in the division that these new guys coming through beat to go on to fight in one of the top guys and stuff like that, I surely there wasn't that. I'm sure that there was a point where you were like, I could be the champion of this division. I'm sure you knew you had it in you, but at that point, after losing to Jamie Richardson, I'm sure if you had told someone that in 16 months I'm going to be the champion of this division, they would have gave you a very strange look.
I think you're right, and this is, I mean, I eventually obviously want to make my way to the UFC and compete there, and I say that to some, to people sometimes, and they kind of look at me like, I don't know about that kind of thing. And I think, listen, nobody thought I was ever going to be a Cage Warriors world champion. So I really don't care too much about many people's opinions. If there was one person who said, actually, I think Matt could be a Cage Warriors world champion, but I don't think he's quite got what it takes to get to the UFC, I might have to listen to someone who might say that. But no one ever said that. Everyone's opinion was, Matt was this journeyman and maybe he'd give you a bit of a tough scrap, but, that's all I would kind of be fit for.
Was there a point in the three fights you won before fighting for the belt? Was there a point where it felt like your momentum had completely shifted, like a point where you thought this is all going as to plan now?
Yeah, I think it was the James Webb fight. I think that was. I was talking again to Paddy about this today, and I was saying every fighter who's had over maybe 15 fights or whatever has that one fight where everything just goes perfect from start to finish, and that's all the way through training camp. That was the tactics that we came up with. It was the fight and everything. It just was perfect, and I enjoyed it. It was the first time I've actually been in a fight and thought, you know what, I'm really enjoying this, and I'm relaxed, and everything I'm throwing is landing, and everything he's doing, I'm defending. And then after that fight, we kind of knew then that it was going to be Frederick after, and I felt very comfortable. I was riding that three fight win streak at that point. So, and I kind of, everybody was scared of Frederick, and even my coaches at one point said, oh, actually, maybe we'll just let Frederick drift off to the UFC, and then we'll kind of finish where he left off in Cage Warriors. But I was quite confident that I could beat him, and I know the fight was a little bit of a scrap, and I think I made it quite hard. But it was, I did what I set out to do, which was win that title.
Yeah, I mean, it did very much seem like the writing was on the wall that Nathias would get that call up. So then when those things don't happen, it's a bit like, well, will he defend the belt again? Will he not? So I think when the fight was announced, again, like I said, your streak crept up on me even when I've watched all of those events. It just it was like, oh, Matt picked up another win. That's brilliant. And then it just kind of accumulated over time. So I think a lot of people going into the fight were like, yeah, Matt's on a good win streak, but Nathias needs that one win to get the UFC call. And obviously you had your own narrative of turning your luck around, and he had his own story going into the fight. What was that fight like for you? Like you said, it was a bit of a scrap. It felt very much, by the time it got to that fourth round, like a real battle of wills. Like it really was down to who could pull it out in those last two rounds. Is that how it felt to you?
It was that was a tough fight, and I really don't know what kind of shape I would have got into that fifth round. I'd wasted an awful lot of energy in the earlier rounds, kind of shooting for that double leg the whole time, and every time I was doing it, Frederick was sprawling and defending and putting his weight on top of mine, and he's a big guy, Frederick. It was an odd fight. I think with Frederick, I've never been kind of faced with someone who wants to do so much damage. That guy wants to hurt you. It's not about winning the fight. It's not about having a nice cushy win. It's not about him rear naked choking you in the first 30 seconds of the first round. He wants to do some real damage, and you can kind of feel that intensity bouncing off him almost. And that's kind of what made me, take a bit of a step back and think, this is dangerous. This guy's got some real knockout power. And so that, I think that kind of bewildered me to a certain extent, and it kind of made me shoot for the takedown a little bit more than I would usually and whatnot. But like you said, it was almost a battle of the wills at the end, and he just kind of wilted. Again, he was in that sprawling position. I've managed to move kind of almost like move away slightly, knees fell forward, and I've managed to kind of lock in this rear naked choke, and he tapped quite quick. So I think he was maybe as exhausted as I was. He was just kind of hiding it a little bit better, I think.
Yeah. Has anything drastically changed from the time when you lost to Jamie Richardson and then went on this run? Like, is there something you can put that turnaround down to? Or is it a mindset thing or a training thing?
Yeah, I think there's two main things. One thing was I ended up getting an S&C coach after that fight, Paul Reed, who works with a lot of the next gen guys, and he kind of built me into this middleweight fighter. I think if you look at the difference in my physique from the Richardson fight to the Frederick, it would have been the George Smith fight. There was a big difference in how I looked, and the physique, how much muscle I had on the frame. And then the second one was just a complete change in mentality from the Jamie Richardson fight. I think I'd always put so much pressure on myself. I'd almost lost before I'd got in there, and it was a case after that fight to think, just enjoy it a little bit more and be grateful that I'm fighting in quarantine when essentially nobody else pretty much on the planet was fighting at that time. So I went in there with a drastically different frame of mind, and and the results spoke for themselves. That was something that really worked, was taking off that pressure and like I say, just enjoying the moment a little bit more.
Yeah. Has that carried on with every win as well? Like the way that this has kept on going on, it's just like that momentum just keeps going forward. So you're just carrying on, enjoying it, and it just goes on and
Definitely.
on.
I mean, that's not to say I won't be nervous for the fight or anything like that. I
Mm-hmm.
still don't want to lose, and I don't want to lose the world title because I've worked so hard to get it. But there's more to life than fighting, and I think I realised that if I could never fight again, there's still other things. It's not this pressure does nothing but just crush you, and you can't perform under it. You take that pressure away, you go in there, and let's face it, after the Jamie Richardson fight, like you said, everyone pretty much thought it was finished anyway. So with that Joel Smith fight, there was all the pressure was on him. He was the prospect. He was on a 5-fight win streak. I went in there in quite a comfortable position, really. And like you say, that kind of dominoed all the way to the Frederick fight.
So obviously, to keep it going, now you've got title defense on your hands, as Cage Warriors always do, because like I said, the division felt a bit strange after Fredericks had defended the belt for the first time, because it felt like he was going to move on at some point, but no one really knew when. And with how old he was, it was like, if it happens now, it needs to happen now if it's going to happen. So it kind of felt a bit in limbo. But as Cage Warriors always do, Ian Dean goes and finds someone that people won't have heard of, and yet he steps in and he can clearly compete with everyone in the division. I don't want to butcher the guy's name, so I'm not gonna attempt to say it. But how much do you know about this guy? Because Ian Dean has an incredible ability to pluck people out of nowhere. And how different is it compared to preparing for the last few fights, where, like you said, you were going in with, of course, you had the win streak, but there still would have been a lot less pressure, I think, in terms of you're just going in there and, like you said, people writing you off. He won't be a Cage Warriors champ. So now you've got there. Does it change things at all, or is that momentum just carrying it forward into just another fight?
I actually feel a lot less pressure now going in. I always said it took 20 years to get anything out of the sport. 20 years. I started when I was 10 years old in Thai boxing, and I think if I lost the next 10 fights now, no one could ever take away that I've won a world title. That's something for me that's worth those 20 years of kind of sacrifice and hard times and whatnot. So I kind of feel like that pressure's almost relieved off a little bit, which again makes me, I think, a little bit more dangerous, because when I've not got that pressure, I fight better and I'm, a lot more dangerous. The guy I'm fighting is Jassi Milan. I think he's originally from the Ivory Coast, but he's lived in France, I believe, for a good long time. And he's a tricky opponent. He's very passive. He's very patient. He's a southpaw, which I don't have too much experience fighting. But he's one of those kind of banana peel fighters. He's not massively dangerous in terms of he's going to knock you out. I don't think he's got that power. He could surprise me with that on Friday, but he's more of a wrestler, grappler. He's a 5'11", but he's thick. He's got big thick build on him, so he's dangerous. And he's 7-0 as well. And there's a lot of things. There's a lot of pros for him. He's coming in, and like you mentioned, no one really knows who he is. So maybe there's a little bit less pressure coming in there. But in terms of pressure for me, I feel comfortable. I think I've got what it takes to maybe get a finish in rounds 2 or 3. And like I say, we'll see what we're dealing with on Friday.
Just looking at the fight on paper, I feel like obviously the big narrative will be about your turnaround over the last 16 months. But I think there's a really interesting contrast between you and him in the way that you've got to this position through fighting nearly every middleweight in the division, having the ups, having the downs, coming back in the last 16 months, beating the scariest middleweight champion in quite some time, I think people would agree on. And then you've got this guy who's undefeated, stepping into Cage Warriors for the first time, like quite an unknown quantity. Whereas, like you said, that everyone, when your fights were happening at this point, if you're a Cage Warriors fan, Matt Bonner, what he does. So it's a really interesting contrast between the two of you, I think. Does that add to the fight at all in terms of you're kind of the proven quantity in a way in this fight, whereas this guy a lot of people don't know about. And so it's an interesting dynamic.
I think you're right. I think I'm the proven quantity when it comes to people who have watched Cage Warriors before. Anyone else on paper is looking at that fight and saying, "Well, Milan's going to run away with this," and whatnot. So you're right. It's a tricky one in terms of, because I'm tried and tested. I've beaten very good guys. James Webb was an ex-world champion. Frederick was the world champion at the time. Where I'm not sure Milan's fought that caliber yet. He's fought. His last fight was against a good guy, but as he had to endure, bad times, has he been put in bad positions and bad situations, and I think that's the threat for someone like Milan, especially because he's so passive as well. Has he been hit properly? Has he been nailed in the face? Has he been dropped? Has he been rocked? Has he been put in bad submission attempts and stuff like that? Where I've had all them bad kind of being rocked. I've never been rocked or anything like that, but I've certainly been in bad positions in my career and had bad losses, and still had the stubbornness to still be able to press forward. So, this fight is gonna show his character. I'm gonna come forward and put it on him, and I'm gonna get him on the cage and smash him to pieces if I can. And it's about whether he can endure that. And nobody knows that from his last fights. That's, like I say, he's quite unproven when it comes to that.
I mean, the word that I've used countless times already since we've been speaking is momentum, and to see that carry on, and it's already an incredible chapter in your career from the last 16 months, from going for 6-1 to becoming the champion, to add a title defense onto that. It just, like I said, it just keeps the ball rolling and keeps that story going. So I'm sure that'll be incredible. It's Friday night, right? The Friday night of the event?
It's Friday, that's right. The 10th.
Brilliant. Can't wait. Thank you for your time, Matt. All the best.
Pleasure.
And hopefully we'll catch up soon with even more momentum. Keep this story going.
Cheers, buddy. Thanks for inviting me on.
No worries, mate. Cheers. Have a good day. Catch you later.
Buddy.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of VMTV Vaults. I've been Kyle Diamond. Thank you to our guest, Mr. Matt Bonner, who I am so hoping that this Friday night ends with another incredible chapter in this career turnaround over the last 16 months. From going 6-1 to through the course of a pandemic, becoming the Cage Warriors middleweight champion. It's why we all love MMA. Hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode of VMTV Vaults, and I'll catch you on the next one. Until then, goodbye.